Good morning. We are reading The Wheel on the School by Meindert de Jong, pictures by Maurice Sendak, and we are on Chapter 10, Wagon in the Sea. Is something wrong? Elke shouted out above the rattling, clanging din as the wagon neared the group around the wheelchair at the side of the road. The wagon stopped. The tin stopped banging. "Yeah, something's wrong, but not here," Janus said. "We heard women screaming on the dike somewhere the other side of the village. We were just going there." "Well, jump on," the Tin Man said, "and we'll get you there as fast as the old horse will go." "Hey, that's right. You in the wheelchair can't do much jumping. Maybe we can all hoist you up and—" "Don't sit there, man, with foolish plans in your mouth," Janus interrupted him. "Get going to that dike. Just give me a chance to grab the back end of the wagon. I'll come on behind some way." It was a crazy procession that stormed into Shora and along the road to the dike. The old horse tried to make speed as best he could, but the added weight of his new passenger slowed him down. But the wagon looked fast, and the tin made it sound faster. The wagon, hobbling and bouncing over the big cobblestones, was one hideous clangor of tin. The pots and pans swung wildly on their wires. Janus in the wheelchair rolled on behind. Janus had taken a stout grip with both hands on the back of the wagon. The rope around his chest kept him from jouncing out of his chair. He was riding almost under the wagon, only his head and shoulders poked up from behind. The teacher in yellow ran beside the wheelchair, straining and panting to keep the bouncing chair upright. "Just so the wheels don't come off," the teacher said. Janus was in fine fettle. He wasn't worrying about the wheels. From behind the wagon, he was trying to urge the horse on, still faster. "Hola! Hola! Hola!" he kept bellowing to the old horse. "Say, tell him back there not to shout hola," the Tin Man yelled. "It sounds too much like whoa to the horse." "Nobody tells Janus anything," Elke told the Tin Man. In spite of the holas, the horse seemed to respond to the excitement in Janus's voice. His bony rump went still higher, his big feet pounded heavily over the cobblestones. He went ahead at full speed for him, and he carried his load out of the village. The women on the dike stood staring in mute unbelief at the loaded tinware wagon as it came storming and banging toward them. Somewhere behind the wagon, the voice of the unseen Janus bellowed out above the din. All the women were back on the dike. A farmer was coming with horses and wagon to rescue Lina and Douwa. The women had not waited for him to hitch his horses to a wagon before they'd run back to the dike. Lina's mother was the first to come to her senses. She dashed down to open the gate that led to the dike path. The dike path was a narrow wagon lane that had been dug on a long gradual slant into the side of the dike. On this path a wagon could mount alongside the steep dike to the top. The wagon ran through the gate and up the long slant of the dike path. The climb slowed the old horse immediately. In a totally flat country, he wasn't used to pulling uphill. He coughed and quivered. He strained with all his bony strength, but the wagon wheels barely turned. Janus yelled, "Hola! Hola! Hola!" It did no good. The horse had given his all. He was too old and sensible to attempt the impossible. He let Janus yell, and the wagon wheels ground practically to a standstill. It was too much for Janus. "Everybody off but the driver and the little kids," he ordered. "And everybody push. Old Bone Rack's had all he can take, and he's got some help coming. He did all right." Janus was almost trying to push the wagon ahead from his wheelchair. All the boys jumped down from the wagon. Even the Tin Man vaulted from the high seat, and his wife took up the reins. Up on top of the dike, Janus stood struck speechless, too surprised to do anything but stare. But as the wagon neared the crest of the dike, she found her voice. Was that my Janus? Did I hear Janus's voice? Then the wagon came over the dike and rolled to a stop before the women. Janus came from behind it in the wheelchair, proudly pushing himself toward his astounded wife. He was triumphant. "Sure it's Janus. Who'd you think it was? Santa Claus?" "No, but it's as good as Santa Claus," the woman said softly. Janus looked away from her and spun his wheelchair around to look at the sea. He took in the situation of old Douwa and Lina, stranded knee-deep in water now, on top of the upturned boat. Once again he stared far out to sea. He sat there almost quivering. He snuffed in the tangy sea air, opening his mouth wide and breathing it deep. Here he was on the dike, with the sea below, thundering in full tide. Here he was in the midst of things again. He shook his head to shake off the mood and then took command. "Off with the kids and Tin here on the top of the dike," he said. "We can't have the Tin Man's wares get rusty from salt water, but we've got to use the wagon to get the old man and the girl. Everybody get busy, but use your heads. If I still know my sea and my tides, we've got half an hour before those two on the boat go under. So pile the stuff neat and don't knock dents into it or scatter it all over." All the women and the boys rushed to unload the wagon. But one of the women remembered the farmer. She rushed away to tell him he and his wagon would not be needed now. "Hey, Tin Man," Janus yelled, "will your horse go into the sea, or would it scare him spitless?" "Not him," the Tin Man said promptly. "He's used to the sea. If I'm near the sea, I take him into the salt water almost every noon to tighten and heal his old flat feet from the road sores. He loves it." "Good," Janus said. He studied the big feet of the horse. "Yes, I can see. He's a willing old skate. Does his best. His splay feet should come in handy. At least he shouldn't sink into the silt when he's got to tug the wagon into the sea. Not on those snowshoe feet of his." Behind Janus, the women and boys had the wagon empty. The neat piles of pots and pans and kettles stood in an orderly row on top of the dike. Here they are. Beyond the piles stood a soldier-like row of coffee pots, which wouldn't stack. Beyond the coffee pots, the pieces of tin, which the Tin Man used to patch old pots and pans, were piled beside his box of tools. Janus ran his eyes over everything and saw that all was in order. "Fine," he said. "Now, into the sea. Just you," he told the Tin Man. "No load. It's better for the horse if the wagon floats. And you two are used to each other." The wagon started slowly down the dike toward the sea, with the old horse hanging his weight against the pushing weight behind him. Now they noticed that on top of the upturned boat, Lina had begun frantically waving her hands at them. Douwa stood beside her, holding her. He seemed to be instructing Lina. "Quiet, everybody," Janus cried. "They're trying to tell us something." The Tin Man stopped the wagon halfway down the dike. Everybody leaned forward to hear the long, screamed-out words that came from the boat over the thundering tide. Lina stopped shouting and turned to the old man as if for further instructions. She began shouting out each word even more slowly this time, and shriller and higher. Janus waved both his hands high above his head. "It's all right, little girl," he bellowed over the waves. "I got it. Janus'll fix it." "Listen," came the drawn-out shrill words. "Listen, Janus. It's not just Douwa and me. There's a wagon wheel, and it's got to be pulled through a hole in the bottom of this boat. The wagon's got to come right over the boat and over the hole. So the wheels have to come off the wagon." Janus waved his hand cheerily. "It's all right, little girl," he called back so hard that the cords of his neck stood out. "Don't worry, Janus will pull that wheel out for you." Lina and the old man waved to show they had understood. For a moment there was excited chatter on the dike. "Lina's got a wheel," the amazed boys told each other. "Lina has found a wheel. Found a wheel in a boat. She went and looked in a boat for a wheel." "It's crazy," Yella summed it up for all of them. But Janus turned on them. "What are you, magpies? Cut out the chatter. Tin Man," he shouted to the wagon on the side of the dike. "Have you got a wagon, Jack?" "Sure have," the Tin Man said. "With a wagon like mine and the wheels I've got, you need a jack almost as much as you need a horse. But I don't think we'll need a jack. The wheels come off easy. They've been on and off so often. If I just ride into the tide, the horse in the water will hold the wagon up enough so we can pull the hind wheels off. It'll be quicker." "Good," Janus said. "If it's quicker, that's what we'll do. We've no time to waste. As the tide gets higher and the tide current begins to hit their legs, those two will find it harder and harder to keep their footing on that slimy boat. Could sweep them off." Janus wasn't satisfied until everybody but the women was busy with the wheels. The teacher was ordered to wade waist deep into the sea to help the Tin Man with the front wheels. They were the only two tall enough to risk the depth of the tidewater that far from the dike. The boys worked on the back wheels. With everybody busy, Janus studied the sea again, and then the half-submerged figures of the old man and the girl standing in the rushing water. "Well," he said to the women, "look at that. There stands that little bun of a girl, and she isn't a bit panicky, up there to her little belly in the cold water. Who did all the screaming a while back before we came?" "That bun of a girl is my daughter," Lina's mother said quietly, "and we did all the screaming. She isn't panicky because of old Douwa, and we aren't panicky now either, you may have noticed. We got desperate because we didn't know what to do, but now you're here, there's a wagon, and you seem to know exactly what to do, and now I'm not worried." Janus went red with pleasure. "Those are kind words, Lina," he said thickly. "You don't know how kind." He looked at his wife. Then he saw all the wheels had been pulled off the wagon. The boys were rolling them up the dike. The back of the wagon rested against the slant of the dike. The horse stood flank deep in the sea. "Down with the tailgate," Janus told the teacher. He propelled himself down the slant of the dike and rode over the open tailgate into the wagon. "Come on," he called. "Everybody on but the women and the tots. We're going to need weight now to hold the wagon in place above that boat if we're going to get that wheel out. Hurry!" His wife stepped toward the wagon. "Janus, do you think—" She bit her tongue to cut off the words. Her whole body went rigid as she forced herself to say no more. The boys piled into the wagon. The teacher pulled the tailgate up and fastened it in place. The Tin Man was already on the high seat. He clucked to the horse. The horse started tugging, but the wheelless rear axle dug into the foot of the dike. All the women hurried forward, and half lifting, half pushing, they freed the back end of the wagon. The horse tugged it into the sea. Now the wagon box floated free. It swung and swayed behind the horse as he breasted the tide. At the foot of the dike, Janus stood wordlessly looking at the swaying, swinging wagon. Her nervous fingers kept digging into her apron pocket as she fought to keep from saying one anxious word. Janus was so excited, so happy. There he sat like a king among the excited, chattering boys. After a moment, Jana looked down at what she was doing. Her fingers in her pocket were rooting among the smooth stones that she had picked up along her bread route that day. They were extra smooth and round, extra special ones for Janus to throw at birds and boys. She pulled them out and looked at them. One by one, she dropped them at her feet. Then she looked at the floating wagon. "Bring them all back safely, Janus, wheel and all," she suddenly cried out. I will, Jana," Janus answered her. "You just leave it to Janus." Jana smiled nervously and kicked at the little pile of stones at her feet. Lina's mother thoughtfully watched the wagon on the sea. Jana looked up at her. "He'll bring your Lina back," Jana assured her. She was quietly proud.